This is from The Guardian. Israel perpetuating war crimes in plain sight in Gaza, says ex-UK diplomat. Mark Smith, who quit Dublin embassy role, says he raised his concerns over weapon sales with Foreign Secretary.
Israel is flagrantly and regularly committing war crimes in Gaza, according to former British diplomat who recently resigned over the minister's failure to ban arms sales to Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Mark Smith, who resigned as a counter-terrorism official at the British Embassy in Dublin after raising complaints about the sale of British weapons to Israel, told the BBC on Monday that he believed Israel to be in breach of international law. Smith told Radio 4's Today program, "When you look at what constitutes a war crime, it's actually quite clear, even from what you see in open source on the TV, that the state of Israel is perpetuating war crimes in plain sight. Anybody who has a kind of basic understanding of these things can see that there are war crimes being committed, not once, not twice, not a few times, but quite flagrantly and openly and regularly." Smith's exit became public over the weekend after a resignation email was leaked in which he accused senior members of the Israeli government of open genocidal intent. In a message that was sent to hundreds of officials and advisors, Smith said there was no justification for the UK's continued arms sales to Israel, yet somehow it continues. The resignation came as the British government carries out a review of its export licensing rules for arms to Israel. David Lammy, now the Foreign Secretary, called in opposition for a pause in sales, but since taking office has said he is looking at curbs of offensive weapons in Gaza. Lammy's review has been delayed because of the widening Middle East crisis and because of the legal difficulty in distinguishing between offensive and defensive weapons. So what would offensive be like? Shields, like police shields and a baton? Would that
All
be?
weapons are offensive.
Well, they're saying the difference between offensive and defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Guns are defensive. They can be offensive, but they're defensive, so that already cancels it out. So it's like, you can send them your freaking police shields, and that's it. That's logical. I wouldn't even give them that much. While that review goes on, lawyers have submitted claims to the High Court in London of Palestinians being tortured, left untreated in hospitals, and unable to escape constant bombardment. The lawyers are seeking a court order blocking further arms sales because of what they say is a clear risk that the weapons would be used to commit breaches in international humanitarian law. Weapons manufacturers seeking export licenses to sell to Israel say they have been told that new licenses have been suspended pending the review. Smith, who says he previously led a government assessment in the legality of arms sales to different countries, said on Monday he had raised his concerns with the foreign secretary and at pretty much every level of the organization. Asked what response he had been given, he replied, "I resigned because of this issue, so you can put the pieces together." But suffice to say that any response was not satisfactory. There is one thing, I don't know if you had read the article that I had sent you, but apparently they are looking into trying countries that were selling, that are or have been selling to Israel as being like part of the war crimes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So U.S.
We just gave them another $20 billion in weapons.
Yeah, it's all listed, like what all we gave them, tanks and all kinds of shit. And so they are looking, the countries that all agreed that Palestine is a state are looking to basically not like sue, but hold the countries that did continue to sell arms to Israel responsible for the deaths in Gaza, which is fantastic. I hope they do. This is from The Guardian. Democratic Party's 92-page platform lacks a call for arms embargo on Israel. The document focused on domestic objectives, such as growing the economy and combating inequality.
The U.S. Democratic Party on Sunday unveiled its platform for November's presidential race, but nowhere in the 92-page document does it mention an arms embargo on Israel, a key demand by uncommitted delegates at the party's four-day convention in Chicago, and a central demand by Gaza war protesters gathering in the city. The platform, which was to be voted on Monday, instead described a wish list of domestic Democrat objectives, among them growing the economy, combating inequality, and the protection of reproductive rights. Reportedly, the document was finalized before Joe Biden stepped away from his White House re-election bid, and it contains both a focus on the achievements of the U.S. president's 4 years in the Oval Office and the now discarded plans for a second term, including healing the soul of America. Whatever the fuck that meant. Meanwhile, Harris and the rest of the Democratic Party are convening as U.S. diplomats scour the Middle East for an elusive ceasefire in Gaza, where Israel has been waging war in retaliation for Hamas's October 7th attack. The issue of a ceasefire, which has divided moderate and progressive members of the party, was not formally discussed in committee hearings when the document was being drafted, according to the Washington Post. The platform makes a strong statement about the historic work that President Biden and Vice President Harris have accomplished hand in hand, and offers a vision for a progressive agenda that we can build on as a nation and as a party as we head into the next 4 years, the Democratic National Committee said in a press release. Gaza protests in Chicago are planned by more than 200 groups, with organizers expecting tens of thousands to join. On Sunday, the city received a possibly early taste of what some fear would be a repeat of the 1968 convention in Chicago that was characterized by a police riot targeting anti-Vietnam protesters. A rally against the Israel-Hamas war and restrictions on reproductive rights was met by a larger showing of Chicago police when it set off down the city's Michigan Avenue. A far larger protest focusing exclusively on U.S. support for Israel is set to begin at noon on Monday at Union Park. Organizers of Sunday's protest steered marchers to the General John Logan Monument in Grant Park, which was also a focal point for protesters in 1968 and featured in photos of the riots. According to the Chicago Sun-Times, Gaza protesters who have promised to deliver a week of justice attempted to disturb a delegate party. An organizer identified by the outlet as Janan said protesters were committed to confronting the party over the war. Welcome to Hell Week, Janan added, another grabbing a microphone at the event to accuse the party of funding a genocide. Nadine Neighbor, an activist with the UIC Arab American Cultural Center, said Democratic politicians were hiding behind women and LGBTQ plus rights as a cover for support of Israel. We are here to fight for our bodies and our hearts, she told the Sun-Times. Any movement guided by radical collective love is like fire. It's inextinguishable. So free Palestine and free them all. So free Palestine and free them all. The combative mood is unlikely to be soothed by the absence of the arms issue from the Democrats' manifesto pledges. Instead, the party calls on members to recommit to support for Israel in the fight against Hamas. It also calls for support for a two-state solution that upholds the right of Palestinians to live in freedom and security in a viable state of their own that many anti-war protesters view as a fig leaf for continued U.S. military aid toward a goal that has shown scant signs of being achieved. But the document does call for an immediate and lasting ceasefire deal that secures the release of all hostages taken by Hamas fighters in the cross-border October 7th raid, as well as aims to protect against the additional displacement and death of thousands. The four-day convention kicks off on Monday night with Biden and the 2016 Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton delivering speeches. Former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton are expected to speak on Tuesday and Wednesday, respectively. Barack apparently made some dick jokes about Trump. He says he's always worried about his crowd size.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Harris's running mate and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz also takes the stage on Wednesday to accept the vice presidential nomination, and Harris will take the spotlight on Thursday. Yeah, the Democratic Party needs to do something. Needs to not support genocide in Israel, right?
I mean, not support genocide, period, would be logical.
Yeah.
Especially not like,
oh my gosh, you're committing genocide? Would you like to buy these weapons?
They're not taking the uncommitted movement seriously enough. I think they can win Michigan 100,000 less votes than they did in 2020. This is from CARE International. Birth under bombs, 9 months of hell.
9 months on from the escalation of violence in Gaza, women there are now 3 times more likely to miscarry and 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. Imagine being pregnant and knowing you're 3 times more likely to miscarry. Imagine being pregnant and knowing you're 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. Imagine being pregnant, experiencing the fear of death every single day. Imagine being pregnant and feeling like the world has completely forgotten you. This is the hell pregnant women in Gaza are living through every day. In the 9 months or 40 weeks that the violence in Gaza has now raged on, instead of spending 9 months safely and hopefully preparing for the birth of their baby, These women have spent the entirety of the pregnancy in constant fear. And remind you, high stress levels also cause you to miscarry and can also cause conditions like preeclampsia, which would make you die in childbirth because you can't be on bed rest for like 4 to 6 weeks. 22-year-old Diana discovered she was pregnant shortly after violence escalated last October and gave birth to her son, Yemen, under intense bombing and gunfire late last week. I had a difficult labor. I was so frightened as the bombing was intense and didn't stop even for a minute. My mother was so afraid for me and the baby. She prayed and prayed that we'd still be alive by dawn. I gave birth to my son, Yemen, at about 2 a.m. There was no special care for the baby when he was born, and he was not fully examined. He has jaundice now, which has affected his brain. Diana is not alone. Over 50,000 women are currently pregnant in Gaza. Around 180 are due to give birth today, but not all of them will make it that far. Pregnant women in Gaza have experienced so much trauma since October that they are 3 times more likely to miscarry than they were before. For those who defy the odds and manage to carry their pregnancy to full term, the likelihood is that they will be forced to give birth in a tent, a temporary shelter, or even in the streets amid the rubble. They will do this without painkillers, while bombs continue to drop around them, knowing that they are now 3 times more likely to die giving birth. Expressing concern on forgetting women and their experiences in this conflict, Haiba al-Hajazi, CARE's regional advocacy advisor for the MENA region, says it's abhorrent that women and their experiences in this conflict have largely been forgotten. The international community has to step up and put them front and center. We need a gendered response to this conflict, one that prioritizes the needs and experiences of women and funds the women leading their communities through crisis. We urgently need governments to use their diplomatic powers and bring an end to the conflict that is destroying lives, many that have only just begun. This is from ABC News. As a father was registering his twins' birth in Gaza, an airstrike killed the 3-day-olds and their mothers at home. The Israeli military said the incident was not currently known to the IDF.
And then once it is known, they will put it under investigation because that is not how the IDF conducts itself, and they don't blah 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 blah.
So the IDF pussies.
Yeah, it's a constant thing. Like, at least, switch it up a little bit.
Oh my god, it's not that hard. Instead, they're just like, what? What? We didn't do that.
We don't approve of that.
When we left his home on Tuesday morning to get birth certificates for his newborn twins, Mohammed Abu al-Qassam never imagined he would return with their death certificates instead. In a matter of minutes, an Israeli strike on the tower building in Deir al-Balah, where Abu al-Qassam family was living under, having been displaced from the north of Gaza, killed his 3-day-old twins, Acer and Isel, together with their mother, Arfa, and grandmother, according to family members. The twins were born on Saturday, August 10th, as written on their birth certificate. On that day, Dr. Arfa shared the news in a Facebook post with friends, welcoming her babies in war-torn Gaza and praying for their health and safety. Now, the few comments to congratulate their birth below the announcement are overshadowed by hundreds of condolences to the family. I helped her raise funds for her to deliver the twins safely. I only spoke with her yesterday. My heart is truly broken, a friend wrote. The Israeli Defense Forces, in a statement to ABC News, said the details of the incident, as published, are not currently known to the IDF. The military added the IDF is fighting against the murderous terrorist organization Hamas in Gaza following the massacre on October 7th. Unlike the terrorist organization Hamas, the IDF targets only military objectives and employs various measures to minimize harm to civilians. Okay, like 90% of the casualties since October 7th have been on the Palestinian side. They target civilians, obviously. They just...
No. You see what happened is they wrapped the babies, the newborn twins, up in like a really tight swaddle, and then they shoved some of the, who are they always after? They shoved some Hamas down in there to hide, inside the baby's blanket. So they had to kill them because, Hamas was underneath the babies inside their blanket. So they had to kill the babies. He had a gun.
The babies were Hamas.
Yep. Actually, I think killing the babies may have radicalized people further to Hamas. So, good job.
No, okay. That's just... reading that every week is just... Abu learned about the news from his brother-in-law, Farah Arafa, who told ABC News that he survived the explosion because he was out to buy bread. I went to register the children the day before. They said to come back tomorrow, so I went, and I was waiting when someone called me telling me that the apartment in which I lived was bombed, Abu told ABC News. As soon as he got the call, he said he rushed to the nearby Al-Qasa hospital where he was told the babies and mother had been taken. Shock and pain overtook him when he saw with his own eyes that the news was true, he said. Videos show him collapsing and shaking, unable to contain his desperation. The couple married in July last year and moved in Gaza City, where she worked as a pharmacist and he worked as a sales representative until October 13th, 2023, when they were forced to evacuate to southern Gaza. At Al-Qasa Hospital, Rafa grieved. He held his brother-in-law and worried about the future of his remaining family. Rafa told ABC News he was living in the same apartment as his mother, sister, her husband, and their babies. The apartment that was filled with joy and happiness since the twins came into this life, he said. Now a massive hole in the building is a reminder of the deadly attack that put an end to the happiness. It also punctuated the difficulties endured by Abu Al-Qasim and his family in the last 10 months of war in Gaza. The displacement, the lack of resources, and the pregnancy carried on during what international humanitarian organizations and the United Nations called a collapsed health system. Minutes before the explosion, I was outside the house. My mother phoned me and told me that she wanted bread. Arafa told ABC News about the morning the tower apartment was hit. Minutes after I ended my call with her, a friend called me and told me that they had all been killed. Arafa said he was overcome by shock. What is the reason? I still can't believe it. A few minutes ago, I was talking to my mother on the phone. He said, we are civilians, and we are looking for our livelihood to provide for our daily needs. We have no connection to organizations, parties, or the military. I do not know why we are bombed. What happened? What began as a simple task of securing birth certificates transformed into a heart-wrenching journey to bury his family and obtain their death certificates. But Muhammad's sorrow is not unique. According to a spokesperson for the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, who told ABC News, this is part of a larger tragedy affecting countless families. This attack wiped out the entire family from the civil registry, raising the number of newborn deaths to 115 children since the beginning of this conflict, Dr. Khalil, spokesperson for the Ministry of Health, told ABC News. The psychological and emotional impact on the father of the two children who were killed is profound. We have approximately 10,000 parents suffering from psychological disorders, most of whom are left untreated and are seen wandering the streets. As the measures and protections for infants and newborns, Al-Quran said the attacks are directed at every citizen of the Gaza Strip, making it possible to protect children, and that the lack of aid and resources is affecting the youngest disproportionately. Thousands of children have been killed in this brutal conflict over the course of just 10 months. When the authorities closed the border crossings and deprived the infants, newborns, and baby formula, the situation became even more dire. Tragically, a significant number of newborns have lost their lives due to malnutrition, too, he said. These appalling atrocities have become tragically commonplace as relentless, indiscriminate assaults continue to claim the lives of so many children and leave countless families devastated. Surely, it must be stopped, a spokesperson for the United Nations, Joan Fan, said in a statement to ABC News.
Like, just imagine that for just a second, that, like, you went to DG to, like, get some milk or whatever, and I called you and I was like, oh, hey, we need some chocolate syrup too. And you're like, all right. And then, like, 2 seconds later, your brother calls you and he's like, dude, your house just blew up.
I would try to punish those
Nobody made it out.
Yeah, I'd try to punish those who are responsible.
Especially if you had a psychological break, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what they're doing to them. They are literally creating their own enemy. Literally creating Hamas members.
Hamas!
I know. Gotta have something stuck in your throat. Like a dick.
Israel is a genocidal bully.
All right.
Free Palestine.